Oh, we haven't done one of these for a little while.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, we drink wine all the time. We just, haven't done it in front of a camera,
Hey,
So
congratulations.
yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Everyone
Congratulations
listens.
to you as well, Winemaker.
Yeah. We just this morning, finished our 41st harvest. So I think this is the earliest we've finished harvest. I don't know the year where we've been.
Well, we wouldn't want to ruin a good story with
Yeah.
some facts or anything like that, but yeah, we wrapped up harvest this morning. So welcome everybody to our official harvest, our first harvest party at the end of the year here. Welcome everybody. I'm Rory Williams.
And I'm John Williams, owner and winemakers.
Owners and winemakers. You got to get the plurals right.
I do. Yeah.
But no, my dad's absolutely right. We finished up our 41st harvest pretty much in record time, and it's been, I wouldn't even call it a roller coaster. It's just been almost an abrupt end to harvest, it feels.
Well, and part of the reason is that it was one of the smallest harvests that I remember. We haven't picked these few grapes since the 80s. So it was a very and why was it small?
Drought.
Yeah.
There's one word to describe it. It's drought. It's been dry, and we've been.
These are historically drought years too, right? I mean, we 77 and 6 and 7 were dry.
Exactly. No, this was, we were looking at some old rain records, and we haven't had a 2-year period here of rainfall like this since 75 to 77.
Okay.
You were like 40 or 50, I think, when that came around. But before that, actually, no recorded event of any kind of rainfall like this. So it is.
I remember being really dry in 1914.
You were just a lad. Right?
I was just a lad.
Sorry, I stole your joke there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, speaking of being dry.
Yeah, exactly.
You mind if I pour myself a glass of wine?
It's incredibly rude, but I've come to expect nothing less. Yeah, got a little. Please fill up your glass with a little bit of 2020 Shenan Blanc, because we are definitely going to start drinking here as we often do. Yeah, just an absolutely record low harvest, and we're hearing that from everybody across Napa. And
so it's not just because we dry farm either. I mean,
nope.
Even the irrigated vineyards in some cases spectacularly water deficit.
Yeah, and so you think, well, couldn't they just irrigate it? It's really not possible, even in a fully irrigated kind of setup. There still needs to be some soil moisture there. You can't possibly provide all of the water, literally all of the water that a vine needs.
You know what, Rory? I was continuously impressed. Well, it's this vintage, but
with my superior grape. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. But the natural intelligence of these grapevines and their knowledge of what capacity of moisture there is and how they regulated their growth, how they slowed down, how they made sure they didn't put on too much. I mean, these are amazing.
They look, the vines look by and large remarkably well for having essentially no water for 2 years straight.
Yeah.
And really they should be in much worse shape. But we could tell this early on this year. The vines got to March and realized, as we did, that there's no rain coming, is there? Yeah. It started to get dry, and the vines self-regulated. It was actually pretty interesting. We started this year late, so
but we had a big cover crop. I mean,
huge cover crop, and it was nice and cold this winter, and the grapes were kind of hedging their bets. They actually budded out a little bit late this year. We got into bloom, just not super late, but just a few days behind. But now we're finishing harvest in essentially record time. And these grapes, basically adjusted their clocks continuously over the year. Even though it wasn't that warm this year, the dryness of the soil told the grapes what to do, which was, hey, you better hop on it. You better get these grapes right, because, in a month from now, if it hasn't rained yet, you may be completely out of energy. And so
they go into survival mode almost, right?
Exactly. And they never really hit survival mode this year. Instead, they're kind of on a normal look. They're just a lot smaller and
talk about smaller. The size of these berries, of course, you know what that means.
It's less high quality, and that's the kind of the silver lining to this year. It's been,
these were berries. They were ridiculously small.
They were pretty small. Actually, Dad, I pulled a sample of 2020 Cabernet out of
staining the glass.
It makes a terrible window, and No, that's the problem with the 2020s is you're going to have to buy all new glasses because they just stain the inside of the glass, and it's
2020 or 2020?
2021. Yeah, sorry, I forgot what year is it?
What time did you get up this morning?
Yeah, but absolutely fabulous quality, and we're just really we're really excited to get this vintage. It's now in the books, and we're starting to get it barreled down and we're going to see how it shakes out. But all indicators are towards just a really fabulous vintage. We'll be tasting later on the 15 cab, which is also a drought year.
Yeah,
so it'll be interesting to see what kind of parallels pop up between the vintages.
Yeah.
But Dad, we got a little Chenin Blanc in our glass.
Oh my God! And have you smelled this yet? This is
Who made this one?
Who made this one?
Yeah. Well, it's all to say that the 2021 vintage is looking like another 100-point vintage for Frogsley.
It's going to be a great vintage, but very, very small. And so we're going to have to be a little creative. And we had a number of special lots going on. We had a lot of I think Pablo seemed absolutely remorse today in the cellar, though. There's always some drama during harvest and excitement, and you can't never have enough tanks, and it's so exciting. And where's this going to go? And we just didn't really have that this year. And so a no drama vintage, I guess.
Yeah, and usually expect to be picking into October and all of that, but it's just not happening. 2020 Shenan Blanc. I think many of you guys will know that we've been growing the Shenan Blanc since 2015. This is at our Gallerin Vineyard, and this is just a tiny little portion of our acreage. Shenan Blanc used to be widely planted all over Napa, so that there used to be thousands of acres in Napa. Even into the mid 90s. Actually, I think in 1988 there was still more Chenin Blanc in Napa than there was Chardonnay. It was a lot. So
it's a good variety for this valley. But Chardonnay became popular, and then everyone took their Chenin Blanc out to plant Chardonnay because it was more valuable. And we were down at the point this wine was made to 7 acres of Chenin Blanc
in the valley.
In the valley, we had a third of it, I think, or something like that.
Exactly.
But there's some bad news.
There's some bad news. Well, it's a silver lining, really. This the portion of the Gallerin Vineyard that the Chenin Blanc was planted in, we've had to redevelop. We're going to be planting it on a new rootstock and a slightly different trellis system. But the Chenin Blanc is coming back. It's actually going to get planted this upcoming spring. We were laying out the plans.
But this is the last one we're going to have until the new vineyard kicks in.
So
stock up on this because it's going to be a little while.
And it's a little too bad because I think we were starting to really hit our groove with it. But we're excited. We're actually going to go back in the Gallerin with more Chenin Blanc planted there than we had before, approximately twice as much, actually.
Right, because these were budded over from another variety. So now we get the rootstock right, and you're going to do something unique with this interplanting.
Yeah,
right?
so it's this would be a really exciting experiment. The Chenin Blanc is going to be front and center with an agroforestry experiment. So to kind of Jessica's looking at me like, a what now? But it's actually very exciting. So Chenin Blanc was always really fun to make. It's got a very different profile than Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, with the texture driven, and we were really excited about that. We were just starting to get into experimenting with concrete with the Chenin Blanc and all of that.
This was done entirely in concrete.
This was done entirely in concrete.
Yeah.
So I think that gives it a little extra richness and a little extra depth to it. But one of the only downsides with the Chenin is that it ripened typically very early. So this would be one of the first picks that we would get each year. And that's not super ideal. We picked it because that's when the acidity was right and when the sugar is right. But I would love for these Chenin Blanc is such a, with that kind of texture driven profile, you really want a little bit of extra time on the vine, not to get more sugar or lose more acidity, but instead to just gain flavor. And that's going to take a little bit of a cooler microclimate there. Well, enter agroforestry, which is the whole principle with agroforestry is interplanting trees of different kinds with the grapevines. And
is it the shade, or is it
it's exactly
humidity?
It modifies the wind, it modifies the sunlight exposure on that to actually cool things down. And they've been doing experiments in France for many years in hot climates there, interplanting different types of trees. And it's able to kind of cool down that microclimate, delay ripening, and really hopefully make a higher quality wine. And I think it'll be really cool because we're going to interplant with olives. And so olive trees obviously make olives.
More olive oil.
And more olive oil. So It's going to be pretty fun. We're going to have to learn how to really become olive farmers because we're going to essentially triple our acreage of olives just by doing this.
And they'll be trellised and yeah. So this is we're constantly thinking about.
It could fail spectacularly. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's something that
it's worth an experiment.
It's worth an experiment, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how with a warming climate and all of that, what kind of effect does this have?
Well, and this is a climate change hedge to a certain extent. Yeah.
And so we did have an interesting question here. Why did we have to turn over the Shenan Blanc vines? All of Galeron has been slated for redevelopment because of the rootstock that is there is not ideally situated to the soil at Galeron, and so we knew we wanted to switch over the rootstock, and so it was already kind of in the books to be done piece by piece. And you guys are fellows, so we'll get you into the nitty gritty here. There's a pest that is in Napa called the Grapevine Mealybug. So just a little white mealybug pest that tends to live under the bark of grapevines, on the trunks and under the bark. It's a really, really pernicious pest. Even with conventional insecticides and hardcore synthetic insecticides, you still really can't eliminate it entirely. We went through for several years, and you can lay out pheromone disruptors that tend to discourage these mealybugs from.
And these mealybugs have come from an abandoned vineyard that was next to the winery.
Exactly. So just on the north side of Galeron is an old vineyard that actually Gallo owns. That
they have them under the bus.
Did I say Gallo? I meant Gallo out of Modesto. They own a piece of property that they basically abandoned a vineyard, and we kept kind of reaching out to them. Hey guys, kind of get your stuff together here. But unfortunately, that pest crossed over the property line, started infecting a few plants there, and we had already started redeveloping other parts of Galeron, and we made the decision, even though most of the Shenan Blanc actually wasn't super heavily affected, but it was in an area that next to vines that had been affected, and we decided to pull the trigger, and in the interest of stopping that pest from spreading to other areas of the vineyard, especially brand new plantings that we had just put in, we decided to take out 14 acres at once, all on the north side of the property, to try to basically contain and stop the pest from entering the.
So that's been followed. So now you got another year. So you'll plant rootstock next spring.
Yeah. So these were actually ripped out after the 2020 harvest. So they had this whole year to sit fallow. We just spread compost there, and we're actually going to spread cover crop seed there in just a few days.
I'm trying to get to when do we get the next Shenan Blanc. So
roots will go in next spring.
Budded in the fall.
Budded in the fall, and we'll probably start seeing grapes, a couple of grapes in 2023, and really we'll start to get a crop in 2024. So
4 more vintages before we get a.
It'll be a little while, It's
but there'll be more then because we're going to
exactly
because we're convinced this is a great variety in this spot, and so so stay tuned and maybe stock up a little bit on the 2020 because it's going to be. We've
loved this wine as it's developed in bottle as well. It just tends to gain depth and really starts to open up aromatically. Chenin Blanc can be a little closed when it's very young. But as it opens up, it's just totally amazing. So,
and as you all know, we've been making Sauvignon Blanc, the other great white grape variety of the Loire region in France, for more than 4 decades. So it just seemed natural to make a little Chenin Blanc, and because I love those wines, the Vouvrays and so on. And this has got. This has got a lot of that depth of texture. Now, how much of that do you think is the aging in the concrete? And it's where Chenin Blanc meets concrete, I think.
Yeah, I think it's just a perfect marriage in that way, that it's like Chenin Blanc has the texture, it's got the depth to really stand up and really take advantage of concrete, which tends to broaden the wine and doesn't really develop it aromatically as much. But I think that's okay with Chenin because the focus is on the
texture. I think if most of you have been here at the winery know that we've invested heavily now in these small concrete cubes, and we're finding new and inventive ways to use them. And 3 of the 4 wines we're going to taste today are heavily impacted by the use of these concrete cubes.
Exactly.
And speaking of that, the experiments going on with the new eggs, we have 8 new eggs this year to do a special Sauvignon Blanc in. So we got some really cool things happening at the winery, and a lot of them focused on the use of concrete.
Yeah. So it'll be pretty fun. You guys will have first shot at essentially a new wine we're making, which is going to be, winery only, fellows only, Sauvignon Blanc that's just fermented in these eggs, selected from the oldest vines that we have at Rossi and the oldest vines that we have at Frank Leeds Ranch, as Leeds Ranch, which go back to 1984, 1981 in the case of Rossi. And so this is, it'll be a wine fermented entirely in the eggs, aged in the eggs for a year, really done in kind of a reserve style. And we're pretty stoked, akin to the Rachel Rossi, but not just from that one block, instead taking from also the oldest blocks at French.
Really celebrating the oldest vines that we have. Yeah, so at least. I don't want to think they're old.
Well, I mean,
oh God, they're old.
This year was a really interesting example of how those old vines, the best looking vines on every ranch were the oldest vines.
Yeah, it was interesting what varieties shook this. I mean, like the Charbonneau and the Mourvèdre and the Zinfandels, they shook off this vintage like, what's the big deal? We don't see that.
I'll put it this way. Things like young vine Cabernet and, some of our vines that are usually big and vigorous and can be highly productive in big vintages. Cabernet, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, a lot of these Bordeaux varieties were down, 40 to 65% this year. So David, you had a question about grape supply. Last year was a down year, but kind of like what you might call normal down, like a one standard deviation down, basically. You don't ever count on something being half off. Grape supply wise, so it is. I mean, you said it. This is going to be our smallest harvest, or it is already our smallest harvest since 1989, when we had how many employees?
9.
If you include me, 10. But I was 5 years old, so I don't know if I really count.
You're even more worthless than
I couldn't even ride the bloody forklift, But it was so. It is really that kind of thing. Whereas Zinfandel, Charbonneau, those were normal off. They were, 15% down, and that was after, it was instructive because things like Zinfandel you often think about as being a dry farm grape, a drought tolerant grape, and we never really thought about it because it usually is totally fine. It's usually pretty similar across all varieties, but when you get to these kind of extreme situations, the old vines and honestly some of these heritage varieties were the ones that
which come from areas where there's naturally less rainfall than the Sauvignon varieties. Yeah, so you're seeing the DNA speak a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
What's the guy got to do to get a glass of Zinfandel around here?
Well, he's got to present a glass to be filled here, Dan.
By the way, this Shenan Blanc is just tasty. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. It is. That's a nice wine. I'm going to take the rest of that bottle home.
Well, that's good because we got a precious amount of it. So
I may have a new granddaughter here pretty soon. You may have a new niece, right?
A new niece,
Kyler and Annie just went to the hospital, so we're expecting any time to get a little the 4th grandchild and counting. But
congrats, Grandpa.
My
brother Kyler, my younger brother Kyler, he and his wife Annie live down in Oakland. Kyler works for a rocket company. He's not a rocket scientist, as we've reminded him for his entire life. But sorry, Kyler, I know you're not watching this. And then Annie works for a solar company. They're both incredibly intelligent people. We are super, super excited to.
That could be one smart kid.
It's be one smart kid, a little girl, and so I have my little girl Alma, and so there'll be my sister. Just had a brand new baby boy, Casey, this just a few weeks ago. So it'll be the 2 Dodd boys versus the 2 Williams girls.
If our grapes were as productive as the you kids, we'd be all set.
Apparently, it's an inverse relationship. I don't know. So we got to shut it down on the family front.
What do we got here? 19 Zinfandel. Oh my gosh, I'm excited to try this.
So 2019, you guys just. We're talking about the low crops and all this. 19 was a big crop.
Last big vintage.
Hopefully not forever. But also a very intense vintage, a very powerful vintage. I think it really shows up with the Zinfandel, where this is still tasting. Sometimes we think of Zinfandel, it's like it's got to jump out of the glass. It's the wine that's ready young. It's the red wine we bottle first usually. But this wine is pretty.
It's just classic. This is going to be a forever wine.
This wine's got layers that need to unpack, I think. And so it's a wine that's going to want some oxygen.
Yeah. We don't often talk too much about the winemaking, but we've done some very, very interesting changes in our approach to all of our wines where, we have this beautiful time right before harvest where the whole winemaking team, Iro and Soshi, Pablo, Rory, and myself, we sit down and we go through everything that, there's a day-to-day routine with how we make these wines. And I don't want to call it a recipe, but, it's what we call the protocols for making a wine, unless we make a decision with these grapes that we want to do something different. And those protocols involve things like natural yeast and things that now are common for us. But we're always tasting, at the same time, we're tasting the wines we made the previous couple or three vintages, saying, well, what do we want to tweak and what do we want to do a little bit differently? And now this isn't, I don't think, the first vintage where we did this, the Petit Syrah infusion into the.
No, I think that was 18. Was the first year.
We were pretty committed by this point, and you want to talk a little bit about that? I think it's really exciting.
So if you guys have the bottle in front of you, then you'll notice on the back 85% Zinfandel, 15% Petite Syrah.
Which isn't unusual.
Not unusual. Petite Syrah is often blended with Zinfandel. The question is, how does it get blended with the Zinfandel? There are lots of ways of doing it. You could pick the Petite Syrah separately and ferment it completely on its own and get it dry, get it into barrel, age it for a little while, and then, check it again back next year and do the same thing with the Zinfandel. And then you could go into a blending protocol and say, well, we want to add, such and such percentage of Petite Syrah, and well, not 15%, we want 14% or something like that. And we've done that, but what ends up happening is the Petite Syrah gets really tannic, and it can be a little bit too dominant in the blend, and it doesn't really seem to augment the Zin as much. And we could also try, we did this for a few years, which is we would, most of our Petite Syrah is planted down in Rutherford, and most of our Zinfandel is actually all of our Zinfandel is in the St. Helena appellation, not that far away.
But a good 2 miles.
A good 2 miles, and that 2 miles starts looking about a million miles in the middle of a harvest day, because we used to try to pick a certain amount of Zinfandel and then get into our cars, drive down to Rutherford, go and pick 4 bins of Petite Syrah so that we could toss it in that same tank. Well, that doesn't work very well either, because after about a week of that, the crew starts looking at their picking knives like they're about to find a different use for it. And it's not ideal because Petite Syrah tends to ripen just a little bit ahead of Zinfandel, so you end up going down.
Well, that was really the big motivator, is that the Zin was getting.
Well, the motivator for me was not getting murdered by the crew, but the motivator for the winemaking team was to find a better winemaking protocol. And you're right, it was the Petite Syrah ripens ahead of the Zin, and so you end up picking overripe Petite Syrah to go with perfectly ripe Zin, or you end up picking perfectly ripe Petite Syrah to go with slightly underripe Zinfandel. It just doesn't work. And so I'll give you full credit, Dad. You had this idea, which was
I'm a genius.
He is a true genius. Is to bring in the Petite Syrah about a week ahead of the Zinfandel, which tends to line up more or less with how it likes to ripen. And you bring it in and you get it cold. You pick it early in the morning, so the grapes are super, super cold. They get into a tank that's being blasted with glycol, so that it's basically this little freezer, stainless steel freezer, basically.
Pre-chill the tank.
And we cold macerate, so it's essentially a week-long cold soak of the Petite Syrah while it waits for the Zinfandel to come in, start fermenting, and then critically, just as Zinfandel tends to, Zinfandel loves to get hot and have a very hot, fast fermentation.
Get up and go variety,
And so as the Zinfandel just starts to peak with its temperature, just as it is starting its fermentation, it tends to heat up quick. That's when the Petite Syrah goes in.
40 degrees Fahrenheit.
So it starts bubbling, and it really, what ends up happening is it cools down the fermentation. Because the Petite Syrah is typically picked at a slightly lower sugar level, it lowers the overall Brix of the tank, and it just mellows out the fermentation and smooths out this beautiful fermentation curve. And it gets us, we found that it gives us better color and tends to harmonize a little bit better with the Zinfandel that way. And augments, really doesn't taste like Petite Syrah mixed with the Zinfandel. It tends to augment the Zinfandel-ness of the wine, which is really what you're after.
Zinfandel-ness?
Yeah, it's Plato came up with that.
Ah, is that right?
Yeah, it's a philosophy term. You wouldn't know. But the essence of Zinfandel is extracted.
Oh, okay,
yes.
Sorry,
Zinfandel essence is a different thing, thanks to Ridge, though.
And aged 50% in concrete. So we really now have, this is part of our standard aging, is that most of this wine is, slightly more than half of it's now aged in the concrete tanks. And And the barrels, there's still some American oak, but
A little bit of American oak, but mostly, this is only about 8 or 9% new oak total. We don't like a lot of new oak in the Zinfandel. I mean, I think you can, even in this young wine, you can taste a little bit of it. And that's enough because that'll mellow out in a couple of years and really start to integrate. And the concrete really tends to bring out the freshness of the wine in just a beautiful way. And that Shane Harvey has an interesting question here. Who, understandably, there's a lot of focus on the grapes, but I'm curious about the rest of the process and ingredients involved. Makes reference to homebrew beer and the kind of the process with beer, which with beer making you have, because the water that is going into the water becomes the beer. Really, it's mixed with the malt. And so obviously the water that you put into your beer becomes incredibly important in terms of mineral content. Beers have very, very specific, often proprietary yeast strains. Closely guarded secrets at big breweries is the yeast strain that's used to ferment beer. There's basically two main types of yeast strains with beer, lager, and ale yeast. And grapes, it's funny, winemaking is very much less about ingredients, except of course,
grapes,
the main ingredient, which is what it's all about. And I think that, if you get really into the weeds with beer making, you start talking about, well, Simcoe hops versus this kind, that kind of hop, and this kind of malt versus that kind of malt, and what it was roasted to, and things like that. You can go down rabbit holes like that, just like you can with wine. But with wine, hopefully you're not adding a bunch of water and a bunch of stuff to it. But winemaking is very much less of a kind of recipe that way. And you mentioned of it, Dad, with the SOPs, because we have an approach that we're going to use to come into a harvest with, where with, for example, the Zinfandel, we do natural yeast on our Zinfandel if everything looks good, and that's part of the process. Is the goal with the procedure or the protocol coming into harvest is, hey, if everything's going good, what's kind of our perfect approach to these wines? Because if the wine comes in perfect, you really don't have to do a whole lot with it.
Yeah, but you've put your finger on a big discussion in the wine industry, is how much do you interfere with this process? Really, the only ingredient you need to make wine is grapes. You don't need to add yeast, you don't need to add salt, you don't need to do anything. It will make a wine in and of itself. And that's a lot of what's behind the natural wine movement. Some of the coolest people in our industry are in the natural wine. I'll drink anything that they bring, as long as they tell me what the hell it is. But I mean, but there are lots of things you can do to correct in things like filtration and adding yeast and use of sulfur and acidity and many other things too, and techniques that you can use in the winemaking process. We tend to view those things as tools that should be on the bench, but probably not used. Using them is almost a corrective, would have to be a corrective thing on a specific wine, would be our thought.
I'd say that our approach is non-dogmatic, and so we prefer to use natural yeast. And in a year like an 18, a 19, a 20, even a 21, the grapes are coming in perfectly healthy. They don't have a bunch of mildew on them. They don't have a bunch of botrytis or anything like that. They're not coming in stressed or compromised in any way. Well, that's an indication to us as winemakers that that's a good environment. We're kind of like microbial wranglers in a way, where we're trying to, set a good environment for yeast to ferment wine in. We can't ferment the wine for them. Honestly, you're kind of just putting the grapes in a tank. And there's a version of that where it says, well, I don't add anything to my wine, and so I'm not going to do anything, which is well and good if the conditions are right for making good wine.
And that's a high percentage of the time.
It's a high percentage of the time. There are percentages of the time. For example, this year, one common thing, because the vines were so drought, they used a lot of their energy stores basically to make it through this year. A lot of the grapes were coming in with very low nitrogen numbers, and so nitrogen it comes in the form of amino acids in the grapes, comes in the form of ammonium. Though that nitrogen is extremely critical to how yeast need to grow. If they don't have that nitrogen, they get pissed off and they stop growing. But before they stop growing, they like to kick out a bunch of rotten egg aroma, just as a final, kind of finger in our face. And so what you end up with, if you're not careful, if you have very, very low nitrogen numbers and you do nothing about it, okay, well, you've done nothing about it. I have not intervened in this wine. Great, it tastes like rotten eggs. And now you've got to add copper to your wine to make it not taste like rotten eggs. And so that sometimes a little bit of proscriptive action, basically on the front end.
A tweak here means that you don't have to use something big.
Something drastic, like a copper addition to a wine that would be really seen as a rescue measure for a wine that would otherwise be unusable.
And so call you an MW.
An MW, yeah. Somebody should call the court of master of wine.
No, microbial wranglers.
No, I know.
Yeah, okay, got it.
I'm going to start putting it. Thank you, Shane.
That's
a fabulous suggestion. I'm going to start putting NW after my name and see if I get any calls about it.
Shout out to Kevin, by the way, who gave this 100 points. I didn't see too many other people going to put out 100 points.
Why not 101 points?
I think this might be just about there. Yeah.
No, but honestly, thank you, Kevin, and we're excited about the 19. I think this is going to be what you might call a lifer. This is a wine that's just going to keep going for, easily 20 years, and really give interest for years beyond that. So I'm super excited to keep drinking the 19. Fortunately, there's quite a bit of it. Can't say as much about the 20 and 21, but it's going to be a really, really fun wine to drink years from now.
Hey, shout out to our friends at the Wine Cellar, by the way. Hey, guys, glad you're tuned in. A little question about the age of these wines. I mean, these are not old vines. These are 40, 45-year-old vines for the most part, right?
Yeah, so the main, about 70% of this wine is coming from our White Barn vineyards, or the Garden Vineyard, which is a vineyard planted in 1978. So still a few years away from, the kind of, according to Hoyle, old vine status, but mature, intelligent. Vines that this year was the only normal looking vineyard that on any of our ranches.
It just sung.
It was like, what drought? Like, come on, bring it on. White Barn is a totally incredible vineyard, 15 acres of pure Zinfandel, right above the Grand Dame of Zinfandel vineyards in the valley, the Hain Vineyard on the west side of St. Helena, right at the upper notch of the big alluvial fan, the Sulphur Creek fan, that really defines St. Helena as not just a cute town with silly clothing stores, but also a really fabulous terroir.
Come on, this is your hometown. You went to school
that's
there.
why I can rag on it. If you need linens, if I got a little town for you. But it's I love the St. Helena terroir, which is defined by this big gravel bench. Molinari Vineyard, the other big source of our Zinfandel, sits at the very edge of that, and White Barn sits at the top of it. Dad, you got a cab glass in front of you.
I've got a cab glass.
What would you like to do with that?
Well, I would like you to pour me a little cab. Is what I'd like you to do. Someone mentioned the composite corks. Yes, we've gone to composite corks on the Chardonnay and the Zinfandel, and we're loving them.
And the Shenan Blanc, apparently.
And the Shenan Blanc as well. Yeah. In the great battle of not having corked bottles, having gone with these composite corks, which are 100% TCA free, has really allowed us to open these bottles with confidence. They age as long as a traditional cork, and they're a little harder to get out of a bottle, in my opinion, but I don't really know other big downside to them. We still use the natural cork in the Cabernet Sauvignon and our
although I will say in the Cabernet and in the Merlot, we have switched to a form of natural cork where every single cork is individually tested by a gas chromatograph for TCA, and that's a developing technology. As you can imagine, it adds about $1 a cork. It's no joke, and so but that's kind of our commitment to getting pissed off enough tasting older. When you open a special wine, it should not have cork taint, and we have come to basically a zero tolerance policy for it.
But okay, so let me ask you a question. We take great pride in how long these wines age, and we're fully confident opening Zinfandels from the 80s and early 90s and 30, 40-year-old Zinfandels that we know are just going to be fine. Do you expect any difference between that and using the composite corks?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think that this is the bugaboo, because of course I can't tell you.
Well, you can lie to me.
Oh, okay. Well, I lie to you all the time. That there was this party that I told you I wasn't going to go to.
Yeah, I knew about that.
No, I'm just kidding. I never got invited to parties. But it's the kind of thing where these composite corks are actually designed in such a way, and Jim, it's an excellent question, to ask how they're going to affect aging. These are designed in such a way not just to eliminate TCA, which is, for us, that's job number one essentially with these. They're also designed to limit the amount of oxygen, the rate of oxygen ingression into the bottle, the ROI, which to a certain defined, basically ppm per year. Really, I'm sorry, this is getting into like the weeds of like, dorking out about corks, right? It gives a whole meaning to cork dork, but it's, there's supposed to be a kind of standard that they hit in terms of how much oxygen gets into the bottle each year. Natural corks are variable with that, and that's part of the source of what you might call bottle variation in naturally cork-topped finished wines. The decision to go with composite cork with the Zinfandel and not with Cab and Merlot is that we know that given our correct sourcing of corks, we know that from an oxygen standpoint, our wines are able to exist within any kind of natural variation with cork. There can be sometimes we wouldn't instantly jump to, they say that it's, whatever percentage of oxygen per year gets into the wine, so that must be a good thing because it's precise. The precision, we're not totally sure what the right number is with that. And it's hard to change once you get the cork in the bottle. So what I think we can say about it is we know that the wines are not going to be blown out. They're not going to be matterized and heavily oxidized.
You want to know what I say about it?
I don't, but I was going to finish it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, but you were saying that rhetorically, so yeah, you can. Go on, Dad.
Well, look, people don't realize, but so much of the oxygen that is available to age a wine is actually in the cork. Natural corks are big cells that are filled with, guess what? Oxygen. And when you put it into the bottle, you essentially compress that cork to get it into the neck of the bottle. So it's a little pressure bomb. And over time, that pressure pushes some of the oxygen into the wine. In a composite cork, you're not getting the same thing. So
more precise, you're getting a very precise amount of it. They're grinding it up, and they have very defined particle sizes, and then they put it all together.
So my guess is this is going to be more reductive as opposed to more oxidative than a natural cork.
You could be right, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing, and or a nothing burger. It could be nothing that really matters.
Or just something to ramble on about for several minutes instead of talking about this fantastic Cabernet Sauvignon, which was our real job, right?
Yeah, apparently.
15. Yeah.
2015, which this is going to be interesting. 2015 was in theme with the 2021 vintage. This was also the second year of a drought. So after the 2013 vintage, we had a little drought that didn't end until 2016. So the 2014 and 2015 vintages were kind of the last set of drought vintages, which wasn't actually all that long ago. So if there's something suspicious about that, it's like there keeps being droughts and fires and things like that. Something about that. Mm-hmm. There's probably a topic there. But the 15 was pretty interesting as another quite powerful, intense vintage that I think is just starting to come out of its shell. So I tasted this wine maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it was completely shut down. It was not generous at all.
It started to make its move, and this is about when about 5-6 years in is when we started to see it making its move, and so this is on its way to that kind of perfect drinking moment. 8 to 10, 12 years is kind of that nice window where there's still a lot of fruit and some development, and then of course I like them when they go a little past that and really start to develop the cedar and the cigar box and all that. You're just getting hints of that for the first time. We know not all of you have this wine, unfortunately, but we'll just sit here and tell you how good it is.
Allow us to describe it for you. It's I think this is following the same kind of aging path as a lot of our wines, which has this moment right after it's released where it's fruity, it's fresh, it's still quite open. and it's still, you know, showing a lot of its kind of youthful energy. And then it does do a little bit of a dip, and it's just only 2 or 3 years that it really goes into a dip. And it's not that it turns bad or anything, but it's, you know, it tends to go a little bit mute and take a lot of air to really show what it's got. It needs to be decanted for a long time. And 15 definitely treaded that path of shutting down and then starting to come back out of it. I think it was an interesting contrast. I know a lot of you have the 2014 Cabernet in your glass. The 14 followed a completely different path, and it was very unusual. And actually, we've been drinking up a lot of our 14s because they've kind of been open and generous from the very get-go, and it really never did have a shutdown period.
Yeah, you know, when I said that about our 84 vintage, and I kept saying, you know, this was so generous and so open. Your vintage, by the way.
I remember.
And I kept thinking, well, it's gonna fade. It never did. So I'm not giving up on that 14. I think the 14s are.
Oh no, it's not fading or anything like that. It's just that it never had that dip.
Yeah,
you know, it never had that dip. Instead, it just kind of kept trucking with some fruitier aromas and started developing. I don't really know what that means in terms of how it's going to go long term. It'll be pretty interesting. You know, the 84 is getting a little up there in years, starting to.
Easy now. You're just a lad.
I'm just a lad. But it's that's scary, kind of scary to think
Boy,
about.
you know, we're so lucky to have these wines go back to, and I hope you all appreciated this, Frog Fellows, that we let a few of these come out of our own personal cellars for you all from time to time, because as much as we hope you all are putting cases of these down, we know that's not a practical thing for all of you, and yet we talk about how these wines age, and so kudos to our team for letting a few of these bottles out every now and then, and we're kind of doubling down on that. We're putting a few more wines in the cellar for this very purpose, because
we like drinking wine. And
we like
drinking wine over long periods of time as well. So
we do.
Well, and I think it's, you know, it's fun. It's fun to remember the years, and fun to remember. You know, it's funny. This was what we called a drought vintage. Of course, we're redefining drought vintage this year, but it's the 2015 vintage was warm. It was actually quite a bit warmer than compared to 2020 and 2021. We had a lot of heat that year. But the drought, when we say drought, then that was more like 18 or 19 inches of rain.
Yeah, what we now consider a big rainfall here.
I'd take it. If I were guaranteed 19 inches of rain this year, I would take it.
By the way, before we get too concerned about this, there are parts of the world that have far less rainfall than this that make spectacular wines. It just maybe is going to change a little bit about rootstock and orientation and things like this, agroforestry, and eventually maybe some varietal considerations.
Well, we're kind of looking at we're pretty curious to see how things like the Charbonneau, the Heritage Blend, please let us know when you get a bottle of the 2021 Heritage, what you think of it, because that was a wine that was also down production-wise, but man, those grapes look good, especially Mourvedre.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I got a little surprise for you. Yeah, I got it over in the corner.
Surprised me. Well, you haven't. It's been years since I've gotten
consider
a
it your birthday present.
Yeah.
When's your birthday? Oh, the same.
Oh yeah.
Remember, we made a little Petit Syrah, 1 cement cube full of Petit Syrah 2020.
Yeah.
I have the first open bottle of it.
So you guys are getting as I'm told, you guys are getting the first look at this. So this is, we've not released this Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've not released this up via mailing list, or it's not actually going to go out through.
No one's seen this, and we're only going to offer it to you
through any of the regular
because I think there's only
channels.
How much, like
90 cases of it.
90 cases.
We made 4 barrels of this wine.
Yeah,
so
there's 30 for me, so that's down to 60. How much do you want?
Oh yeah,
you want at least 10, right?
I gotta put away.
Yeah.
So this is the return.
So there are 3 cases of this available for sale.
Highly allocated. It's the return of the Petit Syrah. So first Petit Syrah vintage since 2016. Actually from a slightly different block. So
why did we stop doing that? Well, I know we needed the grapes.
We needed the grapes
for the Ziffindell program, but oh my God, this is so.
And we wanted to reevaluate what we were doing with Petit Syrah, which you know, we were making a decent amount of it, and it was, you know, kind of one of the what we called the little 3. So not the the wine, one of our mainstream wines, but quite a bit of it. And we liked the wine, but I like the new direction we've taken with it, which this is Petit Syrah from Frank Leeds' ranch. So this is not old vine Petit Syrah, actually quite young vine Petit Syrah, right in the middle of Rutherford Bench, which
But head train and dry farm.
well, young vine Petit Syrah in the middle of Rutherford Bench is probably a rarer thing than old vine Petit Syrah, because nobody's crazy.
What's more rare than old vine Petit Syrah?
Yeah,
Young
exactly.
vine Petit Syrah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is beautiful now 12-year-old head trained, dry farmed, organic vineyard that is just kind of everything that we love about it. Farmed by Frank Leeds and by his daughter, Lauren Pash.
Yeah.
And so we're really, really stoked to bring you this wine. This is a micro ferment. So this is just a couple of the concrete cubes used to ferment this wine, punch down, long, cool fermentation, picked really well, kind of on the early side of ripe as well. This is 12.8% alcohol, and that's hopefully, the kind of style that we're going for with the Petite is bringing it back into this, very structured.
It's fully ripe,
Yeah.
this idea, and there's our friends from the wine cellar talking about 13-point alcohol as being on the 13.8 on the Cabernet Sauvignon as being low alcohol, but man,
It's funny because when you talk about low alcohol, it's like it's necessarily you're talking about, well, it's lower alcohol in this or it's lower alcohol in that. It's almost like you're talking about dialing back the flavor or something like that. Like we've stripped something away from the wine, and I hope when you guys get this Petit Syrah, you'll see.
First of all, I hope you get some because this is
it's really
awesome.
Well, it's peeling back that layer of alcohol, that kind of veneer of alcohol, especially with something like Petit Syrah, which is Petites, as you know, you can always tell when we go out to sample Petit Syrah because our teeth are black, and it's an inky, dark, tannic grape, and I think that tends sometimes to drive us in a direction where we're like, oh well, it's this inky, dark, tannic grape. Let's make it darker and inkier and more tannic.
That's a natural tendency of other winemakers.
Let's just beat the hell out of it. Let's put a bunch of new oak on it. Blah blah blah. And
let's make this the manly wine it wants to be.
Right. And instead, Petit Syrah is not like that. Petit Syrah, when you do that to it, it gets monolithic. It gets super tannic and extracted, and kind of just clunky and top heavy. But Petit Syrah, this is showing, peel back that veneer, and you're gaining in the wine. What you gain is orange blossom, white pepper, these kinds of citrus rind and things like this that are like, what? Purple, violets, these kind of beautiful floral notes, things that you are not usually used in the same sentence with Petit Syrah of all things.
So aromatic, beautiful.
It makes it aromatic, it makes it elegant, and that's, I think, what makes it frog's leap in a way to me is pulling back that veneer. And the same thing is true with Cabernet. When you pull back this veneer of needing the wine to be big, so-called big, and Napa Cab, one word, right? It's this brand and this whole commodity really. And when you peel back the alcohol, you peel back a little bit of that drive for over extraction, you end up gaining in the wine, and you gain that. You tasted it with the 15 was complexity and a lot of different ways to go.
Hey, a lesson learned on this wine too. Remember, we used to we were so excited when we got the concrete cask that we were aging this wine in the concrete, and it became very reductive and really closed down. This week we fermented it in the concrete because we didn't have everything else small enough, but it was aged in neutral barrels.
Aged in neutral barrels, so no new oak on the wine, and I think that's.
But I think that's opened up the wine and really allowed for that beautiful, as you mentioned, all those components of the aromatics. Very nice.
No, and the concrete cubes tend to make things more reductive, and what that means is that there's much less oxygen coming into contact with the wine in a concrete tank than there is in a barrel. And a barrel is necessarily very oxidative. There's oxygen in the wood, there's oxygen coming in. Actually, most of the oxygen that gets into a barrel is when you pull out the bung at the top to top it up with wine and you put it back in. That's where a lot of that oxygen comes in. Concrete vessels aren't porous. They're not breathable in that way. They really are you know, not permeable to oxygen, but they're not inert, which is a really key difference. Stainless steel, you know, impermeable to oxygen, also completely inert, a very different kind of environment than concrete, where you have concrete, you have raw stone really interacting with the wine. The stone itself is charged and will have some kind of oxidative transfer with the wine, but it's much, much slower and much, much less pronounced than in a barrel. And importantly, Dad, I think the biggest difference we see, just this is, again, sorry guys, we're getting into some of the real nitty gritty here. There's something about, I think it's some kind of charge of electric charge in the stone.
Yeah, look, everyone would like to know the answer to this, but the bottom line is that it keeps the lees in suspension, so it's almost like an anaerobic batonnage, if you will, in the wine.
And so the lees stay in suspension. What we do know is that the same wine put into concrete as put into barrel will take about 3 times longer to fully clarify in a concrete vessel than it will in a barrel. It just stays hazy and stays cloudy. The lees keep moving in it. It doesn't seem to matter whether it's egg-shaped, coffin-shaped, cube-shaped, whatever shape it is. If it's concrete, the lees keep moving for a long time. And that, as you mentioned, is like anaerobic batonnage. So instead of going in there and manually stirring it up, those lees like you would in a traditional white Burgundy situation, instead you're getting a lot of that lees contact, a lot of that lees breakdown and enrichment of the wine. But you're doing that without any oxygen really coming into it.
Good question came across about the cubes, which hold 4 barrels of wine. The bottom line is these cubes have an indefinite lifespan. We intend to use these forever. They're clean. They obviously can be clean. I think a real question is, they are porous. So some of the wine is being, so as long as they're a sweet, it would be like a cask, right?
Well, they're not porous in the sense of losing a bunch of wine through it or anything
like
that.
a barrel. Yeah.
No, but they have a surface. It's not a completely smooth surface. And so there would, you could have some concern about that. I think that's why
maybe Brettanomyces, but you can actually use a treatment to get rid of the Brettanomyces in concrete.
You can.
Well.
We've never had an issue with it, and I think importantly, we don't use things like caustic solvents or anything like that, soda ash or anything like that in the concrete for fear of stripping that away. And before we use these casts, and this is actually a very important step with a concrete cube, is we will make a very, very heavy solution of tartaric acid. So tartaric acid is it's actually the main grape acid. We have it in the winery, and we will mix it in with just pure water, and we will wash the tank with tartaric acid for a couple of hours. And that actually kind of coats and fills in any of the nooks and crannies of that stone with tartaric acid crystals. And that helps kind of protect the wine. It helps fill in some of those gaps. And it's an important step we found in not, helping protect the wine.
Facts on that a little bit. The bottom line about this is that look, it takes a 75-year-old oak tree to make 2 brand new barrels. We were buying 400 or 500 barrels a year, so that you're talking about 250 trees getting cut down to make barrels just for frog sleep. These, to the extent that these concrete cubes can give us a better effect in terms of the aging with respect to like the Zim. Now we're finding that they're not fully effective on the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Merlot. It's a great sustainability play as well. And look, these cubes cost about the same as 4 brand new barrels, a little bit more. And with an indefinite lifespan, eventually they're going to really, well, within a short period of time, really pay for themselves as well. So very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's we're really excited about them. We're really excited about what they can do. We're still trying to figure out what's perfect with them. They're very useful parts of our cellar at this point, because we have a couple of images from harvest this year.
Scott, let's spit some of these pictures of harvest so people can join us during harvest. We'll continue to.
We hope you guys like peanut gallery commentary as we go along.
This Petit Syrah.
So that's Frank and I. It's on a Sauvignon Blanc harvest morning. So that's at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Out there watching the grapes come in. So that's from earlier in the year.
Why do we start so early?
Helps keep the grapes cool. More importantly, it helps keep the team cool. So harvest is, especially with Sauvignon Blanc, is very difficult to pick. And so this is actually a weird feature of Sauvignon Blanc, or not a weird feature, just a feature, not a bug apparently, of Sauvignon Blanc is very tiny clusters, always very tiny clusters, always lots of clusters on a vine in order to achieve vine balance. And on one of these big old vines, these are some of the old vines at Frank's Ranch, these vines will have 150 clusters on them, and that takes a while to pick. That's 150 cuts per vine to really not pick that many grapes in terms of weight-wise. So it takes a long time to pick a block of Sauvignon Blanc. And if you start with sunrise, you're picking until 11, 12 o'clock in the morning when it's hot, you're tired, you're pissed off, you're more likely to hurt yourself. And so we started this many years ago. We invested in these lights, which are very bright and love to fail in the middle of the night when you least expect it. Actually, we had good luck with them this year. But it's perfect for starting around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to really get what's actually the coldest time of the morning, which is right before dawn. Make that the center of harvest. So we start a few hours pre-dawn and end just a couple hours post-dawn. And that seems to be a nice balance between not starting at midnight every night for 2 months, which tends to wear on you.
Well, I don't think the grapes are as cold. I mean, just because the air is cold doesn't mean the grapes have cooled down. So I really do believe this 2 to 4 o'clock time zone is better. And but of course, it does mean we have to be up at 2 or 4 o'clock.
Well, and it's a serious consideration because, as we've said, harvest is a marathon, and so you can't wear yourself out on Sauvignon Blanc because guess what, bud? Yep. You got some cab to pick in Zinfandel and Chardonnay. Sauvignon Blanc coming into the hopper here from earlier in the year. Those are grapes.
Our brand new forklift.
In the background, which nobody likes to drive because it's weird to drive.
Yeah, well, we need to disable all the safety features.
We're working on. I asked Pablo to pull that fuse, but the guy was right there. And apparently, you can't ask the technician to pull the right fuse. They're not allowed to. Yeah. I got Jorge Polanco, so Pablo's son, and Mike up there sorting out grapes, making sure everything's
material other than grapes.
Material other than grapes.
Mogging. Yeah. What else you guys got? Oh, well, there's the maestro, man. If you guys don't know, Pablo has been here direct. He's a director. He's really the production winemaker. Well, he is the production winemaker. He inspects every cluster like that before it goes up the hopper.
Every single one of them.
Every single one of them. And for now,
we'll just go with that.
38 years. Is that right? Is that possible?
Not quite 38 years. I think it's actually 29 years. But
29 years.
Yeah, but long time. And Pablo. My mentor in the cellar, Pablo was my first. You'd think that my dad was my first boss in the cellar, but he had already moved on into semi-retirement by the time I worked in the cellar. Pablo was the first guy to give me a job in the cellar, scrubbing barrel buns with a sulfur solution. So one of the most glamorous jobs in the cellar, actually.
It's one of the top jobs.
Got to have clean buns, as they always.
What else you guys got? Oh, there we go. There's the team.
There's the team.
Yeah.
And
minus the ladies' crew is still out picking, I think.
Ladies' crew was in a different block, but the photographer was out, and the guys spontaneously decided to stop picking for a second and get apparently a heroic pose going.
Yeah, they won. Yeah.
So across from left, there's me. You got Juan, Gerardo, Luis, Jose Rojas, Octaviano, Giovanni, and Aristeo on the right there. And then kneeling, you've got Salvador, and you got Jose Luis. So our team, part of our team, with some big bunches of Sauvignon Blanc right in front of them. Wish we had a few more of those boxes this year. Yeah. What else we guys got in the lab?
Oh, look at that.
Proof that he makes wine.
An important decision. I know we're running out of time here, but how do we decide which vineyard to pick? And it's a big process. So Frank and I do a lot of the sampling. You were running the crew this year. You didn't do that much sampling, but what this means is we go out into the vineyard early in the morning and get little bags of grapes from the various blocks, and then we come back. That's Sochi Polanco, assistant winemaker. And so we crush these up and we measure the sugar, the acid, and the pH. And any particular block would be analyzed at least 10 times so we can see the progression of the key components of ripening. And that's how. And then we all gather in the early morning or after the grapes are picked, and decide what we're going to pick over the next 3 days. And so that's the process you see going on there. A lot of walking. That's why I'm so slim and healthy looking. Is that
I was about to mention that.
yeah, I know you were. Yeah.
No, it's something, and my dad didn't say it, but I'll say it. I think it's something that is not unique to Frogsley, but still really super important, is that my dad samples the grapes. I sample the grapes. Frank samples the grapes. It is not something we farm out to interns, which grape sampling is, frankly, a pain in the ass, especially when you're on sample number 200 of the year and your belly is full of nothing but coffee and grapes, and that it's about to revolt. But it's an incredibly important.
I think Alma is going to be our primary grape sample.
Yeah, all she does is go around and demand to eat grapes. I'm trying to explain to her that it's called sampling grapes, not
Bubbies.
Yeah, Bobby's.
Yeah.
That's her name for berries. So she just wakes up in the morning, points outside the window and says, "Bobbies," and they're like, yeah, there are some bobbies out there. Not as many as I would like.
She's going to be really disappointed that harvest.
Well, she's actually discovering second crop now.
Oh, okay, yeah. Of course.
Turns out harvest never ends. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We're hopeful to bring you some great wine from 2021. We're stoked about the harvest. Wish we had a little bit more of it, but obviously you guys are going to get first dibs on what there is of it. And I hope you enjoy the Petit Syrah when it rolls out and you're enjoying all the wines in front of you.
Stay healthy, stay happy. Come and visit us. We are open. We love you guys. You're so critical to our success. We're going to do another one of these coming up. What, in December?
December.
Yeah.
November.
And
what year is it? Yeah.
Yeah. What year? And we are here, and we got to harvest picking the grapes is over, but the work is just starting.
Work is just starting, so we'll start getting our early returns here soon.
Yeah.
So
excellent. Here's to y'all. Have a great fall, and come and visit us, and we'll be back with you on December 4th, I think.
December 4th. I've got a just hearing December 4th at 3 p.m.
Yeah. Thanks to our team for pulling this together today. Thanks for the flies for joining us.
Yep.
And we will see you at the next tasting, you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.